fair. Okay.
Now,
Hello, welcome to Diploma Sports, an intelligent intersection of sports and politics, and everything that is interesting in the world of me. That didn't come out right. Anyways, my name is Nick. Joining me on the line is Ghost Politics. Hello, Ghost. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Nick. Good day. Good day. A lot of good football, but today is not about sports or games. Today is about a very hot topic. Why don't you introduce that for us?
Yeah. So today we're going to be discussing immigration. It's a very complicated topic, so we'll break it into several sections. We're going to look at legal immigration, work visas, and the current refugee crisis. We'll also examine the wall President Trump-elect Trump campaigned on, and discuss illegal immigration in this country. We'll discuss things like crime statistics of illegal immigrants, kind of pontificate on how to fix these problems, address some of the myths, or what I would argue are myths of illegal immigration, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one
And I'm
thing.
going to explain why those myths
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to explain why those myths don't matter.
Okay, well, fair enough. We'll dive into it. This is couple things I want to mention just real quick. Make sure to check out our website at wordpress.com/diplomasports and like and share us on Facebook, Twitter, and a variety of other newer social platforms. Why don't you tell them about that, Ghost?
Yeah, remember, you can find us on Facebook. Obviously, we have our page there, and please like and share if you enjoy what we do. And if you don't, please tell us why you don't like what we do. You can also follow us on Twitter at Diploma Sports. There's a link in the description below. We are also on Minds and Gab. Check us out on those platforms, and check out those platforms if you haven't checked them out. There's some interesting stuff going on there. All right, back to you, Nick.
Yeah, I know. I'll have to do that myself, to be honest. Okay, so to start, let me know if this sounds good to you. We'll give a brief statement on our general beliefs out of immigration. We'll kind of touch on a few of the main points we want to emphasize. Well, I want to explain to the audience, this debate is sure to be contentious. Both my colleague and I disagree vehemently on a lot of these issues. It may seem like we're a bit testy, but that's, all part of the fun. Just want to remind you that when you're arguing with people that disagree with you, it is okay to disagree with them. And while you might despise their beliefs, you still have to respect their right to have them. And ultimately, if you are offended by something, you should learn how to argue why they're wrong and not just be offended by something. Do you want to emphasize that, or do you have a point to make on that as well?
I can't agree more with that. It was when I was younger, I was a huge fan of Christopher Hitchens while he was alive, and I always thought it was fantastic when he brought on people who had insanely different worldviews to his and would argue with them and give them the forum. I thought that was just something that was so brave and awesome that he did while he was alive, and I think we are sorely lacking for not having him to this day.
Yeah, and I certainly agree. So why don't you explain a little bit where you're coming from on this issue? I'll open it up to you, and then we'll kind of just let the conversation flow from there.
All right. So to understand immigration in the United States, we have to kind of understand the context of immigration in the 21st century. Now, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when people immigrated to the United States, there was no welfare state. In fact, there was no income tax. Their entire government was funded by tariffs. It was insanely smaller. We did not take foreign wars into Europe. These were all things we did not do. So when an immigrant came here, and if they succeeded, then after immigrating here, you know what? They came here, they had a family, they had children, their children had children, and so on and so forth, and they've survived to this day. But it's not the same as it was back then. It is completely different. Today, illegal immigrants, not just legal immigrants, have access to 70% of welfare benefits in this country. So you don't even need an actual social security number. If you just have a child born here who, by virtue of, I can't remember the amendment, I think 14th Amendment, it's where we legalize slavery. The only way we could legalize slavery, we don't legalize slaves in the United States, was to say that by being born here, you were given the right of being an American citizen. Now, should that apply to people that have anchor babies? I don't agree with that. I think that we have to revisit that. The 14th Amendment is very clear. It was to address the wrong of slavery. Now, if you have a child here that is a legal citizen, you, as an illegal immigrant, can take out a great deal of welfare benefits that you have not paid into the system for, or should not be entitled to, that our homeless people and our various other disaffected citizens should be prioritized for. just kind of the fairness and the modern context of illegal immigration. Now, legal immigration, as for certain programs such as the H-1B visa program, which is probably the most egregious in some of these these other work visa programs that are around, I think the H-1B visa program needs to be either radically changed or eliminated altogether. I have an article that will be going up later this week discussing why H-1B visas are terrible for American tech workers. I've read some articles where tech executives have explained how they fabricated parts of the tech or the STEM crisis of basically us not having enough STEM workers in order to get a large pool of cheap labor from India and China and various other countries that have moderates, not high skilled tech labor, but moderate skilled. It's kind of just like, a college degree, but not the kind of level where it's like C-level executives or people. No, just people that we have our own citizens who can take these jobs, but American businesses did not want to pay the wages that would have been required. They didn't want to pay the benefits. They didn't want to risk their best employees leaving because their best employees could leave, unlike H-1B visa workers who have a ton of difficulty leaving their business. It's just a very, very anti-employee piece of legislation that is very bad for American workers, and it's not even that great for the foreign workers because they can't really improve. Now, granted, yes, it's probably better than a job they could get in their home country, but it's not even that great for them here because they're trapped with their employer, and their employer basically has to sign off to say, oh, wow, this guy's great. Would I let him leave? And then when they do leave, they're not that great employees to start with. Now, as for just the demographics of legal immigration, I generally don't have that big a deal with it. I think it's not that big a deal with people coming from South America or people coming from Africa, as long as they're willing to assimilate. That doesn't mean you have to abandon your culture. It just means you have to become American. You don't. I'm not asking you to go to church. I don't go to church. I've never gone to church. I'm just asking you to kind of assimilate to the American society of hard work, and be a good neighbor. Be kind, generous. All these different American values that we have, but also be ambitious. And lastly, let's talk about the migrant crisis. It's not a refugee crisis. There is a refugee crisis. The problem is the refugee crisis ends as soon as the people fleeing Syria and Iraq arrive in Turkey. Once you're in Turkey, you are no longer a refugee. You have escaped the crisis zone. And I mean, unless you're a Christian in Turkey and are worried about being oppressed there, you're safe in Turkey. But once you start heading to Europe or trying to get into the US, you are now a migrant, usually an economic migrant. And there are many migrants in Europe who are coming to Sweden, Germany, and France to receive welfare. But the important thing is that as soon as you're out of Iraq and Syria and Turkey, you are no longer in a war zone and you are no longer a refugee. Not to mention many of the Pakistani and Afghani migrants who are coming out into Europe, and some of the North African migrants as well who are coming into Europe and taking advantage of welfare systems. And unfortunately, crime rates are raising in cities with high refugee populations. I don't like that it's happening. I'd like to think they are all coming from Iraq and Syria and just looking to survive this horrible humanitarian crisis that's partially the U.S.'s fault for our overthrowing of Assad and placing the blame for chemical weapons on him when the evidence seems to be pointing to the Free Syrian Army and the supposed moderate rebels. I mean, it's a no-win situation there, and we should probably get our hands out of it, but that's a whole other issue. But that's my thoughts on the migrant crisis. Illegal immigration, there's no question. And if you're here illegally, well, let me just be a bit charitable, okay? If you're here illegally and you're not taking any welfare out of the system and you're just trying to make it through, those are the last people I would think about sending back, and I would probably work to get those people integrated into society. Then a step up would be the people who have taken out welfare. Those people I have much less sympathy for than the hard workers. Maybe if they didn't pay taxes because they're working under the table, it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, I don't like that you're doing that. I also don't like that we have to tax every business for every little transaction. But if you're not taking out welfare, that's not so bad. Now, above the welfare recipients, the people I would take out before them, of course, are the criminals. And I would look to negotiate some sort of treaty with Mexico to ensure that they stay in jail in Mexico, but I'm sure they don't want to do that because that would cut into the Mexican government's funds, and they don't. I mean, even the criminals are still sending back remittances, which are funding their economy and Carlos Slim. Now, as for the children of illegal immigrants, yeah, I know they're born in America and they only know America. I don't care. They should go home with their parents because it's more important for them to live with their parents than to live illegally in another country. I think it's just too important. Those years are too valuable, and that interaction with your parents is just too valuable to separate them from their parents. So we have to send them home with their parents so that they can form a life in Mexico. And if they are good citizens for years and they get in line with the immigration process and try to get in here legally, I think we could give them a little bit of leeway trying to get into the country. Perhaps not put them in front of line because their parents cheated to get in line, but perhaps give them a little bit of preferential treatment to other new people that have just gotten in line. But that would be it. And those are my views generally on immigration. So Nick, will you take it away? Give
All
your
right,
side.
so yeah, a lot to digest on this, so a lot to fire back on. So don't worry, I'm not just gonna let him spew this for forever without pushing back. First thing, what I agree with you on, certainly you're more knowledge on the whole work visa issue, and I certainly agree that there's a lot of things that we need to take a point of that. Just to plug our own podcast, we do have an article written by Ghost Politics himself, explaining that why that's an issue. I think it's a very interesting read, so definitely check that out. As far as the refugee crisis, and I will still call it a refugee crisis because it is still horrible, what is going on? I think the answer is that we need to be more engaged, not less. I think it's absolutely pitiful the little amount that we've done to actually ensure that some of these people who really need help are getting the help they deserve. Ultimately, I think that to some, and I'll address these points individually, but to some of what I think you're saying is while I understand pragmatically where a lot of things are coming from. I'm generally of the mindset that we need to put a little bit more humanity in how we do politics and how we take care of people, and not less. But having said that, let's just start with a few of the points. Continuing on with the refugee crisis, I believe that our screening process is already very much adequate. I think there's plenty to be said about Europe. Immigration in Europe is very much different, or I mean, migrants in Europe is very much different than migrants coming here. I think that Trump has been scapegoating minorities and doing that to gain power, talking about the screening process and talking about, extreme vetting, which if anybody who actually looks at the processes themselves, it's up to like 17 different steps. These processes can take anywhere from a year to a year and a half. And generally speaking, until we get that terrorist that is a Syrian refugee in large numbers, unless you can provide me that sort of data, I really think that you're overreacting. And like I said, I believe Trump ultimately won his presidency scapegoating minorities and did it to gain power. Okay, next point. As far as the deal with issue with illegal immigration, I think that is completely absurd that you would say that they don't contribute to the welfare state. If anything, I would say they contribute more than a lot of these billionaires you defend all the time. They pay taxes on everything that they do in this country. In fact, 10% of a remittance, 10% of what the illegal aliens make, and we shouldn't call them illegal aliens because no human is illegal, but regardless, using your term, 10% of that goes back to their home countries to help their family. About 10%. That means 90% of that money stays here. That's 90% of the money that goes into our economy, boosts our jobs, and ultimately, a lot of these people are doing work that we ourselves would not do, and we ourselves would not be able to pay people to do. What we have in this country is an economic problem. It's not a security problem. It's not an overpopulation problem. It's an economic problem. We have people that are doing jobs that we need them to do, and we have a system where corporate America is getting in the way with basically hiring people and paying them under the table, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really where we need to target these problems, and we need to be realistic with the fact that there are 11 million people here, but they're not going to go anywhere. No amount of like police camps that Trump tries to set up are going to deport people. The whole idea of a wall is absurd. The fact that you're going to have a conservative president advocate for spending billions of federal taxpayers on a wall that will never be completed and will never actually be effective. Because you show me a 30-foot wall, I'll show you a 31-foot ladder. All right. And then I think another point that I want to make is that we need that this also has to do with wage laws. If we enforced minimum wage laws, and if we made it so that people could pay, that we provided a path to citizenship, so that these citizens, because they are citizens in this country, regardless of whether you want to call them citizens, they live here, they have their families here, they have their lives here. We ultimately need to accept that we need to find a way to assimilate them into society. And the best way to do that, I think, is not necessarily amnesty, but we need to find a path to that. There's a lot of points to touch on here. You certainly said a lot very eloquently. So yeah, I think we'll be better off just going between specific issues. So let's start with.
I have a good point to start with.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to start with the economics of it. And I'm going to make a bold statement here about the economics of illegal immigrants. That it does not matter if we are 1% better off economically for having illegal immigrants in this country. Because they are illegal aliens. They are here illegally. They have illegally crossed our border and broken the law. They are criminals by virtue of crossing our border, which is enforced, and they are informed in ignorance, even if they did not know that our border is there. This isn't Hillary Clinton, okay? They're not allowed to have ignorance of the law have them get away with a crime. We have a border. It is supposed to be enforced, and they have broken the law. So they are illegal. They are not citizens. Now, it does not matter if we were 1 penny better off for having illegal immigrants. We were actually better off with the British. We actually got better prices for our tea with the British when we seceded from Britain. But it did not matter because the principle is more important. The principle of self-government and the right to be taxed with representation is more important than the economics itself. Now, it is not fair to tell people waiting in line to come to the United States that, sorry, you don't live in Mexico, that you cannot just walk across the border and become citizens automatically. That is not fair. That is not fair, and it is not just. And that is not a way we should run our society. Because if we are to say, oh, well, the immigration laws, because it's too hard to enforce, why do it? Okay, what if I'm not audited every year? What if my taxes aren't audited and I'm not paying my taxes? Should I be able to say, well, you guys weren't enforcing the laws enough? Why should I have to pay my taxes? You weren't catching me. I don't think we should apply that to immigration because we can apply that to so many other things with terrible consequences.
Okay. So yes, you make a valid point about it not being fair. I certainly empathize with people who have been waiting in legal immigration. It must be really horrible to do everything right and then have somebody who doesn't get ahead of you. I certainly agree on that. I think that's completely ridiculous. That if you're saying if I could prove to you that having these people in our country makes us 1% better, you would still not be for it.
Yes,
I think principles are useless if they get in the way of actually governing. Now, to your other point, yeah, it's about legal rule and all of that. But I really think that's kind of a horrible argument to make if you just consider the history of the United States. I mean, basically, you look at a large population of African Americans; they were basically forced to be citizens of this country, and then we basically wiped out Native Americans and made their land our land. We ultimately took California from Mexico when it was, and basically paid them money and took their land violently.
Yes.
So for America to sit here and stand on principle and act like, oh, well, it's being American, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, ultimately, these people contribute very much to our society. They do jobs that I know people that aren't working that are white that could go out and pick strawberries in a field and do not. So I mean, I think it's just kind of absurd. I mean, it's completely ridiculous to just to sit here and make a whole, oh, we're American. We have to stand by our principles, even though we break our principles every day in everything we do.
Let me be very clear about this whole argument that Americans will not do the job. That's a complete lack of understanding. That this is like understanding the world as if the government or some high power sets the price of wages. Okay, now, yes, Americans will not pick strawberries at the prices people are paying people to pick strawberries. Why can companies afford to pay people almost nothing to pick strawberries? Because there is a large supply of workers who can afford, who don't have to pay as much into the system as we do, who don't have as much They don't have to pay the ACA fee. They don't have to pay all these different things that U.S. citizens have to pay. They don't have families, as some do, but they don't necessarily have them here. Okay, it's because they can accept a lower wage that businesses will pay them a lower wage. If those workers were gone from the worker pool, you would have one of two things happen. A higher wage would be paid to entice white people or just citizens who could be Mexican citizens here legally to pick strawberries. Will spend a whole bunch of money on R&D and buying capital equipment to automate the process. Those are the two things that will happen if you controlled immigration.
All right. Well, I mean, that's certainly a valid point. If you're gonna, if I mean, eventually we are going to be at a situation where where basically jobs like McDonald's jobs are basically going to be all automated anyways.
And why is
that? Because it's cheaper for companies, and companies don't really, give a shit about anything other than profit.
Well, no, because the minimum wage is going to go too high, and people won't be able to afford to put people in those jobs. I mean, that's clearly the consequence.
I'm pretty sure McDonald's can afford it. I think
they can, but why would you? You can't just say to your shareholders, "Well, guys, we can afford it, so we're going to lose a whole bunch of money."
What about to your?
That's not how it works.
What about to your communities that you employ? What about to your communities that you supply food to? I mean, your shareholders. I don't give a shit about their shareholders. They can go to hell.
But you have to understand that the guys running their business have to explain, or they're all fired. If you start losing money, or if you start doing shit out of the goodness of your heart, you're going to lose money.
Well, and ultimately that's the problem with society. But we're getting off topic here.
Yes.
I want to touch on a specific point that you made in your opening soliloquy as well. I want to talk about the whole if people are born in America, they should have to go back with their family. And I can tell you that is categorically untrue. I mean, that's completely ridiculous for somebody if you're 3 years old and you've been here for 14 years, or so you're 17, you came here when you were 3 and you've been here for 14 years, you've had American education, but you're a year away from graduating from high school. Oh, just go back with your family because that's just the way it has to be. Like, that's completely, so we basically have just sentenced that kid to a life of poverty when we could have them here in America going to college and bettering their life.
Let's address that question. Why are we sending them back to a life of poverty? Why is Mexico a land of poverty? Why is it like that?
I mean, there's a variety of reasons why Mexico is.
Did we steal all of their wealth? Did we take their gold mines? Did we take their energy reserves? I mean,
we took their land.
What did we do to Mexico to make them so poor?
Well, they're run by drug cartels. Actually, no, I can tell you exactly what we did to Mexico. We do their cocaine. That's exactly what we did to Mexico. We ruined Mexico because Americans love coke.
Let me tell you what happens to Mexico when you have a porous border with them. The smartest, most talented people in Mexico escape Mexico for a better life. So we drain all of the talent from Mexico. So the people who could fix Mexico and could make Mexico a country worth living are now gone and sending remittances back home to Mexico. They're not in their country fixing things or getting into government there to make life better for the people there. They're coming here because life is way better here than it is there.
But you take one position, and I would say that while you are true, ultimately maybe they've taken into consideration that there is no better way for life there. Even if they were to say maybe that is just a broken state, it's a broken system. There's not. I mean, I couldn't blame anybody you wouldn't want to live there. I couldn't blame people who are coming across. And ultimately, too, there's another point I want to make is that the majority of illegal immigrants did not come across the border. They just overstayed their visa. And I think that's a general argument that conservatives, libertarians, whatever, ignore. The border is not necessary. I mean, not that it's not necessary. The border wall is not necessary for the biggest reason that people are just not flooding over the border anymore. There are many of the illegal immigrants, and there's a reason that illegal immigration hasn't spiked anymore. It's at its 11 million, and it's been pretty consistent for the last couple of years.
I think the remittance numbers draw a much more accurate picture of illegal immigration. I think it's closer to 20 million, but because you can't exactly go up to people who have broken the law and ask them and survey them, hey, are you here illegally? We need a count of you. They're not exactly the most likely to answer surveys.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I'm not arguing over the state of numbers. If it's 11 or 20, it doesn't necessarily change.
The number is irrelevant to me as well.
It's more about what do we actually do moving forward? What is your actual solution? Because I understand what your argument's making. It's not racist. It's not it's not bigoted to say that people are here illegally and that's not fair. And if they are indeed draining from the economy, if they are criminals, if they are people who are not benefiting society, then then I completely understand. I guess my problem is that I know people whose parents are not here legally, but are planning on, or were planning on, until of course Trump won, we're planning on investing in America and having their own business. And to me, I'd rather have them here. I don't care if it's some big principle that we have evaded. I think we need to challenge the issue now. We need to compromise, and we need to come up with a legitimate solution. We need to realize that spending billions of dollars on a wall and spending billions of dollars on rounding people up is not going to fix anything. It's not going to fix our economy. In fact, it's going to have a very disastrous effect on our economy.
Well,
What
let's
we need to do is we need to move forward, and that's the whole point. So could you not make the
let's actually go
compromise
back
that,
to
yeah, we
that.
need to get rid of the felons, we need to get rid of criminals. If you get convicted of a felony and you're not here legally, then you should be sent back. But can we not admit that there needs to be some middle ground here?
No, and let me get to rounding people up actually, because back in the 50s under President Eisenhower, you do know of Operation Wetback, right?
I've heard, yeah.
Well, we had
that's
coordination with the Mexican government, and we deported, I think, 10 million people. 10 million people, with our government about probably a tenth the size of what it is today. Just infinitely smaller, infinitely less money to spend on it. We deported that many
Sorry,
people.
real quick, a plane just flew over my house. It
I see.
happens every once in a while.
I'm
I
not
just
saying it is
missed that
not.
last sentence of yours.
It is not impractical to deport 10 million people. We've done it before. We could do it again. Our government is way more bloated and way more way more full of cash than it was back when Eisenhower was president. It is very doable. Now, is that my preferred way
I
to
don't want to
deport
see that
people?
on the news. I
That's
don't
not
want
my
that from my government.
that's not my preferred way to deport people. My preferred way to deport people is to make it impossible for them to live in our society so that they will go home of their own accord and try to fix their own country. Because I want Mexico to be a thriving economy. I want Mexico to work. I don't want people to be fleeing and running for the hills from Mexico. I want people to go home to Mexico and try to make Mexico a better country, to take back their country from drug cartels, to take it back from Carlos Slim and his oligopoly over their economy. That's what I want to happen to Mexico. I'm perfectly fine with people coming here legally. I just don't want all of their citizens leaving and taking away their potential.
So no compromise is what you're saying.
No compromise.
All right. Well,
I don't think we're helping. I don't think we're helping them by giving them and their people an out. I don't think we help Mexico as a country. I don't think we help them as a people by giving them an out.
well, and I don't think we help those 17-year-old kids who have made their life here and spent their entire life here. I don't think we help them by sending them back to Mexico.
It's a principle. It's not fair that they're here. It is
I
not
don't,
fair. They have
and like
taken
I said,
away.
I really don't care about principles. Principles are
I
for
know.
people who don't actually govern.
But they are taking. You understand, like, the consequences of having too many citizens. They don't speak English. They increased. My mother works as a teacher, right? And she teaches special education, but she also talks to other teachers. And it's really hard when you have too many students, because we have illegal immigrants who have their kids going to our schools that they're not paying the same amount of taxes to get them into, but they're putting a strain on our schools. They're lowering our education standard for our students because we have to hold back our students to teach them English. And we need Common Core and other nonsense.
How about just teaching everybody Spanish too? Because we could be
no?
we could be a country that actually teaches more than one language, and makes it so that people can actually communicate with one of the other person. I think you just you want your principle so bad. You want it to just be like, oh, this world, and it's just not practical. It's not going to happen.
How is it practical to have two languages? The Canadians have been doing it for a generation, and it's awful there. Every Canadian I've talked to about having the French-English split, they hate it. It's stupid.
Okay, well, obviously, yeah. I'm not talking about specifically about that particular argument. I'm just saying with overall. Okay, so let's segue over then. We both discussed. Obviously, you're not compromised. I'm saying that I'm willing to understand that we need to obviously deport criminals and stuff, but we need to really have a more comprehensive approach. But nonetheless, let's continue.
Well, I mean, look, I would have a lot more respect for your position if you were housing illegal immigrants in your own home and were taking care of these people with your own money. Like that, I would have a lot more respect for. But I don't think we should take resources from our citizens and our people who are suffering and give it to people who are here illegally, who have broken.
But I think that's just a ridiculous argument, because I mean, I'm okay with paying my taxes for the welfare of all of the legal immigrants that are here. I'm not okay with paying for my taxes for that new aircraft carrier that they're most likely gonna purchase. But we don't get to say what our taxes are spent for.
No, I know, but we do get to say our government has an obligation to enforce the law.
Yeah, and they also have but I also think with many laws that they're outdated and we need a new approach.
Okay, then change the law. go to government, change the law, and then okay, fine. If we legalize the Gang of Eight bill, fine. That's the law of the land. I wouldn't fight you anymore on it. But go take it to the public forum, take it to Congress, get it passed legally, and then I'll say, okay, your position is now the accepted law of the land. But until then, it is not.
Well, fair enough. But I mean, to be fair, Democrats have tried to propose comprehensive immigration reform millions of times, and Republicans won't even take it to a vote. So it's your own party. You need to tell to take it to a vote.
My party tried to pass an awful amnesty bill. You guys could have helped them.
And also too, just to not sound like a super Democrat, it's also worth noting that Obama has deported more people than Bush. So you know, Democrats.
Well, I'm not happy with Bush's position on immigration. I think he's a Reagan open borders-ite, and I think he was an idiot for that. Very stupid position. He cost us 2008 for sure, just for that position alone.
I think he cost you 2008 with a fair amount of positions, but
yes, it did not help. Yes, the two wars and the bloating of the federal government. Yes, that did not help at all.
Okay, so I think we beat that topic to death. Particularly, let's continue on and let's discuss. We can stay in the same realm of illegal immigration, but let's discuss Trump. Because
the God Emperor himself. What about him?
Yes. So explain to me exactly how this wall thing is going to work. How is it a conservative thing to spend billions of dollars on a project that doesn't do anything?
Well, let me just start by saying yes, walls do work. All right, and this is not a comparison I like to use, but if you remember, there was a partition between Germany decades ago, where people were fleeing East Germany in droves. I think 4 million of them fled.
Do you know how large that? Not to interrupt you, but you know how long that wall had to be to divide Germany versus how long it would have to be to divide us?
Obviously, much smaller, and obviously it was manned by armed guards. Obviously, yes, but they went from 4 million illegal immigration, 4 million instances of illegal immigration to 30,000.
You mean 4 million people going between their own country because their own country was divided by? Yeah, okay, never mind.
Look, I'm not going to defend the Soviets on this one. Okay, I'm not. I'm not going to defend them. But my point is, walls do work. Okay, whether that's just a better border fence with improved border control or not, it is very doable and it is very fiscally possible, and it will be very easy to pressure Mexico into paying for it.
How? Okay, that's completely absurd. Explain to me how you're going to pressure Mexico into paying for anything when the boss has basically told you "F you" with his middle finger raised into the air.
Yeah, and then he met with them, and no, they're going to pay for it. I'll tell you why. Because remittances outpace oil sales in Mexico. That is the number one source of revenue for Mexico, is remittances from citizens living in the United States, both legally and illegally. Now, if you tell them, look, we can either tax remittances 10% or you can pay for the wall, I'm pretty sure the economists in Mexico aren't going to go, you know, guys, I'd rather cripple my economy for 10 to 20 years or 4 years at minimum, or let's just help an infrastructure project where we can even get our citizens working on it as well on our end. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, I understand.
But this is my point. Is that you can pressure them. Okay, like, look, we hold all of the negotiating power. This is one of the areas where Obama has failed. He has not pressed our advantage.
Well, because he's actually wanted to be liked, where I guess Trump doesn't really give a shit about.
And we shouldn't care if we're liked. We should.
I think being liked on a global stage is an important thing, but that's also another topic for another time.
But this is just part of our God complex. We think like, oh, everyone has to worship us. It's the old, we just need everyone to
not
love
worship,
us.
But I'd prefer more countries not to bomb us. I'd prefer it to be more liked around the globe and respected and viewed as not. So when we travel, when I go to Mexico, people aren't like, well, look at that dumb American and his dumb government. I'd rather be respected around the world.
Bomb us, Nick. It's ideological fanatics who bomb us generally. In fact, if you look at opinion polls, most countries agree that we do the most bad and the most good in the world. It's really confusing.
Well, let's eliminate the most bad. We don't need to do the most bad in the world too.
We should not be bombing people with death drones in the air in the Middle East. Okay, we should find a better way to kill bad guys, or not kill them.
Yes, better way to kill bad guys. That's something we can all get behind.
Yeah. But
okay, so you're saying the wall is practical and that Mexico can pay for it, which I think is absolutely absurd. But let's just gloss across over that.
For both us and Mexico.
what else are you so you're saying you want to make the world, you want to make it so hard for people to be able to survive here and that they go back on their own.
And
Um,
improve their own country and demand political change and demand that the oligarchical economic system run by people like Carlos Slim and the drug cartel, or the drug cartels, they're obviously not working together, I hope not, can change, that they can open up their economy, but they're not.
Well, I think it's gonna be fun. We're gonna take a road trip down to New Mexico and look at that 15-foot wall that's like half built like 10 years from now. And we'll just we'll have ourselves a nice little giggle about that useless wall that he's gonna build. But
Hey
nonetheless,
man, it's gonna go 10 feet higher.
yeah, it's and there's those. I'm gonna go into business making 31-foot ladders. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, good luck getting them into Mexico with that 40% tariff they're gonna counter us with. You're gonna be able to make no money on it.
It's not about making money. It should never be about making money. It should be about
So,
making people's lives better, Mikey. Or Ghost. Shit. Sorry.
it's fine. It's Ghost. All right. So this is your idea, right? Your idea is that, I need people to come here. Why do you want people to come here illegally? Why do you want people to
It's not.
flee no, but why do you want them to flee their own country? Okay, they need to fix their own country, and the only thing that can fix a country is the people. They have to have a reason to fix their own country. Otherwise,
Okay, so two points I want to push back on. One, not every illegal immigrant is coming from Mexico. Sometimes they're escaping, Guatemala or El Salvador, which has much worse crime rates even than say Mexico. So
and they still need to fix that country too.
well, okay, but it's not that I want more people to come in. I just want us to be realistic about the fact that they're already here, that they already are a valuable member of our society. Like I said, I think they're more than 1%, making us more than 1% better. I think given our historical context and the fact that we've murdered millions of Native Americans and slavery and all of these things that we've done, and I think historical context is important. I think that we need to be pragmatic and adjust our laws so that, as you said, so that it is the law of the land, whether it's passing the Gang of Eight bill or doing any sort of complicated immigration reform, we need to be realistic about it. I think that your positions are unrealistic, and I don't think that Trump actually believes that he can get any of it done. I think that Trump just used that to race bait and convince a bunch of white people to vote for him. Because ultimately they've doubled the border patrol since Bush said it was a problem. They've almost tripled the border patrol. There is tons of border patrol. There is tons of those stupid, idiotic mercenaries that are just patrolling the border trying to catch people like they're animals. I mean, just have that some compassion, people. How about we work on a solution that's better for everybody? We don't have the migrant crisis that they do in Europe. We have the space. And ultimately, I love Mexican food. I love and I love Mexican people. And I think that they produce a valuable. They are valuable to your society. And I think that us demeaning them by assuming that anybody who comes across the border illegally is a criminal or is going to commit crime and is not just looking for a better life, I just don't think it's productive. I don't think you've outlined anything that will make anybody's life better. I think you've just outlined ways to make people feel less bad about their own shitty lives.
Whoa. First of all, everyone who crosses the border illegally has become a criminal. As of the way the laws are today, at this moment in time, they become criminals the second they cross that border illegally.
And I'm saying let's provide amnesty for that. Let's fix the problem. Let's actually fix the problem and not just bitch about the problem.
But you're not helping Mexico. You're making their country continue to be a hellhole. You're making it impossible for them to improve.
And I just don't think sending back 11 million people who are basically Americans, because that's the one thing that I don't think you've mentioned, is that you say, oh, people need to come here and be American. By the nature of them coming here in general, because our society is so much of a melting pot, they are American. They watch American television. Everybody watches American television. They know American songs. They are American. Whether they've spent 5 years here or 5 minutes, they're basically American already just by taking in our culture. I think that they have every right to stay just as much as I think we did when we killed all those Native Americans.
Well, first of all, we conquered them. All right, I'm not going to apologize for conquering a people. Okay.
Yes. I will apologize for it. It's a horrible thing to do. We could have just stayed. We could have stayed on the East Coast or stayed in New England or in actual England. But no, rather we had to come here and manifest destiny and all that stuff. We have a lot to apologize for.
We could have finished killing them and we didn't. They should be happy we let them live at all.
Well, I think that's pretty ruthless and cruel, but we don't need to discuss.
Hey man, I can't change history. All I can do is change the future. And what I don't want is I don't want Mexico to get worse than it already is. I want Mexico to become a better place to live. I want people to want to live in Mexico. I want people to want to live in El Salvador. I want them to not fear death by gangs. I want them to fix their problems. But they're not going to do it if they leave. They're not going to do it if they're fleeing to the United States. And it's good to have stable neighbors. It's great that Canada's up north generally being pretty good. You know, it's great that we have a stable neighbor on our northern border who's also kind of also a small buffer against Russia if something crazy happened. It'd be nice to have on our southern border, Mexico, be a nice, stable, wonderful place to live instead of just where we dump all of our factories.
Yeah, well, but one to your credit, if we fixed one thing, we would solve a lot of that, and that's if we ended the drug war. You and I both agree on that. I mean, I think that's really more of the root of the issue in Mexico. Like you say, you want to make Mexico better, and I agree. And it would be great if we could if we made Mexico so great that that the immigrants who are here illegally would just go back because it's better there. I mean, that ultimately should be our goal. So if we ended the drug war, because like I said, really the main reason that Mexico is so messed up is because Americans do a lot of cocaine. It's not really weed anymore because we grow our own, but with cocaine, that is severely coming from the south. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation.
Well, I mean, cocaine is Colombia mostly.
Well, yes, but it still has to come through Mexico. Like basically, if you look at the reason that the drug cartels are rich, it's because of cocaine. It's because of Americans doing cocaine. One of two things needs to happen in order to make Mexico better. Three things. Okay, so either Mexico actually grows a pair and stands up to the cartels. Doubtful. Yeah. Second option.
I understand what happens when people stand up to cartels, right? People that have that kind of power. I understand why they're cowards.
Yeah. No, but so that's not going to happen. Either we have to hope that Americans stop doing cocaine, which is definitely not going to happen.
No, that's not going to happen.
Or we have to eliminate the drug war. And you and I can both agree on that, right? That's some common ground.
Yeah, I agree 100%. If we ended the drug war tomorrow, the world would be a better place. Yes, more people would legally be doing drugs, but less people would be going to jail and having their lives ruined for it, and there would be less skirmishes between highly armed cartel agents and U.S. agents that should be doing other things.
Yes, and if you got rid of the cartel's power, and then you could really start. I think you could really start to see some real change. So maybe let's do you have any other specific points you want to make, or should we let's transition over to the refugee/migrant crisis?
Yeah, well, I think yes, we definitely ending the drug war would be huge for helping Mexico come into the 21st century. You know, as now there's just a whole bunch of oligopolical structures between Carlos Slim, between their their energy barons, and between the cartels themselves. There's a shit ton of problems that we cause for. I apologize for my language. A ton of problems.
It's okay. I've cursed a few enough times.
There's a ton of problems that we cause by virtue of waging the drug war. You know, there are people that are fearing for their lives. Their communities are becoming war zones. Okay, and the problem I think is not so much the U.S. The U.S. is a huge problem in the drug war. But I don't think Mexican politicians can afford to end the drug war, unfortunately. I think it would be political suicide for most of them because, people are suffering every day from drug cartels, and they don't really want peace. It's just like FARC in what's the South American country, the commie rebels that, like the government is like, hey, we voted for a peace accord with FARC, and they said, yeah, screw you, man. We want to finish off FARC. And I'm like, I sympathize with them because of all the terror that they caused on the country, but look, I mean, the drugs should not be illegal. Yes, they ruin people's lives. Yes, they ruin communities. But you know what? What ruins communities more is bullets. Bullets everywhere.
All right. And to be honest, it's not it's people. People ruin their own communities. It's not the drugs. It's people. It's people, because you can be on drugs and still have a 9 to 5 and still function and just do it as fun. But obviously these are people with diseases and addiction problems, and it's obviously a very complicated issue. But ultimately, we have to let people decide for themselves how they want to live or ruin their own life.
I've heard some interesting discussions about how kind of deprived childhoods, like deprivation of like good relations with like parents, deprivation of dopamine essentially makes you extra susceptible to drug addiction. If you didn't get it, like if you didn't get enough interaction with your mother when you were little, it can actually literally affect your addiction like capabilities.
That's pretty interesting, actually.
Which is why you got to fix things when kids are young, or just not have kids if you're going to be an ignorant parent. Obviously, but that's a much longer discussion.
We can talk about that another time, because I actually kind of weirdly enough agree with you on some of the radical discussions we've had over the years about tests for having kids and things of that nature. But we'll talk about that on another podcast.
That'll be a fun time.
So I think I've said my piece. Basically, to sum up, I think that we need more compassion, not less. I don't think that it's ludicrous to offer amnesty to the people that it's here. I think it's much more insane to try to build a wall, et cetera, et cetera, and a variety of other issues, which hopefully I've touched upon eloquently enough over the course of this podcast. So now, do you want to say, or sum up your
So to just sum up my piece, let's make Mexico great again, and let's make it a country so great that all of the illegal immigrants will flee home to go live in a great society that isn't living under fear of attack and has a much more open economy.
Hey, don't get me wrong. I would be perfectly if you told me, if you told me that Mexico is going to get good, so everybody was going to want to go home. While I would argue that we might be a worse place after the fact, I would certainly be happy for them to have their country back. Because I can certainly feel what it's like having Trump run our country. So now my country's gone for 4 years. So we'll see how this goes.
No, I mean, it'd be a virtuous cycle. I think we'd all benefit from having Mexico be doing better. I think that, there'd just be so much more. We'd be exporting way more goods to Mexico than we currently do. That
I would travel there all the time too.
Yeah, no, I would love to visit like Mexico City, if they got it cleaned up and it was a lot of fun, I mean, yeah. But let's move on to the refugee/migrant crisis in Europe, and how about you start us off?
Okay, so basically what I want to say, and I think my main key point with this, I don't have as much to argue on this point, but I think my main point is and what I've said to you before is that I think that the issue in Europe is much different than the issue here, and I think that ultimately the argument gets jumbled, and we assume that when we're talking about the crisis, like it may very well be a migrant crisis when referring to us. It's definitely still a refugee crisis when referring to them, or in Europe essentially. But I would say that their issues and their problems are much more specific to Europe and much less specific to us. And I think you have to kind of look at them very differently. So having said that, while the reports about that Hillary and Obama were going to bring in 100,000, 250,000, whatever the number was, obviously that's a little extreme and drastic, and I can see why people are nervous about something like that. I still think we have done far little considering. You kind of said that we're partially responsible for it. I think we're very much responsible for everything that's been going on in the Middle East. And I think it's the least we can do to actually help some of these people because they just wanted to, go to school and raise their kids and have a life like we have here. And now they're stuck in the middle of a civil war. So I think we need to, again, treat this issue with a little bit more compassion. But I do understand the concerns, and I understand that we need good vetting, but I would also argue that we already have really good vetting. And I don't, I'm not nervous about the migrants that we currently have in this country. And I think that we need to increase those numbers.
Okay.
So that's my general basic approach.
Well, I think there's something very important we have to talk about when we talk about the refugees from Syria. I think we have to there's a very, very different case with refugees coming from South America than refugees coming from Syria and Iraq and the Middle East in general. I think it's very important to understand that these people come from a massive monoculture of Islam. Now, unfortunately, it's a very fragmented monoculture, but there are some severe problems with the views that people of the Islamic faith have in our society. We worried about allowing gay people to marry. There, they worry about whether or not they murder gay people, or if they stone adulterers, or if they cut off I don't know if they cut off people's hands. I don't remember if that part of Hammurabi's code they still follow, but there's a lot of backwards views. And unfortunately, you go to a place like the UK and you survey a whole bunch of Muslims in the UK who should be, first world citizens of the United States, citizens of the UK. And you've got 25% of them agreeing to, suicide bombing is an acceptable form of protest. Or you've got them saying, I think it was 100% in this one survey said that being gay was not an acceptable lifestyle. 100%. I don't even think the Westboro Baptist Church would give you a 100% hit rate on.
Even Russia. Russia's like 70%. And I thought that was crazy.
Even Russia. 70%. If we were having migrants coming from Russia, I would have the same issue with people coming from Russia. It's not about their skin color. It's about their views. And it's about their culture they live in. So that's a very important thing we have to distinguish. For me, it's not the terrorists I'm worried about. It's the views that the people coming hold that I'm worried about. Because I have family that's gay. Now, I myself am a non-believer, and some people interpret that as, some people interpret everyone starts off as Muslim, and then if you are an atheist, you've left the faith.
You
And
heathen.
yes, exactly. And that scares me because the death sentence for non-believers is a very real thing in a lot of the Islamic world. The death sentence for being gay is a big part of in the Islamic world. Now, that's fortunately for us in the United States, and I'm just going to veer us off a little bit. The immigrants we took from the Middle East originally, our Persian immigrants in particular, and some of our immigrants from the region were the wealthy immigrants who were fleeing the Ayatollah coming to power in Iran. So it's kind of like having Cuban refugees, like they're fleeing Castro, so they love America by virtue of, holy crap, we got away from this insane theocratic society that would have made our lives hell. So we don't understand the blue collar everyday migrants coming over the border from the Middle East that Europe is getting. That's a completely different class of migrants altogether. I have great friends from Persia and India who are Muslim, and but that's not important. They're fantastic people, wonderful. One's a physicist who's kicking ass in college, and the other is working at like a major real estate firm designing buildings, and they're fantastic. They're brilliant and smart. But I don't know everyday Muslim citizens from these countries. I don't know who's coming. I don't know what all these fighting age men fleeing Iraq and Syria are. So it's not fair for me to use my point of reference to kind of understand the migrants coming here. Like with people coming from Mexico and South America, I know some of them personally. I understand like more blue collar people who come across the border. Like I feel like I have an understanding of them, but for the people coming from the Middle East, I don't understand them personally. So I don't know. Maybe they are all wonderful people who want to live in a secular society. Unfortunately, the opinion polls I've been reading are not showing very well. Now, on to the actual crisis itself. So I think this idea of taking refugees to the United States is a misguided idea. I think you bring a bunch of refugees to California or Minnesota, and it's a completely different society from what they're used to. I'm not saying they can't integrate. I'm just saying it's very difficult to change from brutal, theocratic, 1400-year-old desert worship society that's run generally by those rules, except for Syria, which is unfortunately it was a more secular country before the Islamic State came over. But you come from that and this kind of tribalistic mentality where you've had these tribes who've been killing each other for hundreds of years, to here, which is a very secular society. I mean, yeah, we have churches everywhere, but generally we try our best to keep religion out of politics, except for Indiana and a couple other states in the Midwest. It's not as easy to integrate. I mean, the ideal, of course, would be to have the oil-rich Gulf states take in these refugees into their societies where they speak the common language, they have this similar religion. They may have a different perspective, maybe not send the Sunnis to a Shia majority country and vice versa. Unfortunately, we have to keep account of that. But, when you've got, I think, Qatar being the only Gulf state taking in more than one refugee, and they took in 250,000, which is good. It's better than nothing. Unfortunately, these countries are not doing their part, and I don't think we can convince them to do their part. Now, Turkey, I mean, I have many massive disagreements with Turkey, but I think Turkey has really stepped up on the crisis. Now, there's a lot of discussion about them having refugees flood into Europe to try and pressure the EU to let them enter, but I mean that's not as important. I mean, they're getting the people who are arriving in Turkey from Syria and Iraq. They are safe. They're safe from the Islamic State. They're safe from the extremists there. But most of them don't stop in Turkey because Turkey's not a great country for welfare benefits and other things. So they usually head to Germany and Sweden and France because they're very, very open to foreigners coming in. And so for me, I think the ideal way to handle the crisis, the ideal way to the best of all worlds, the best of keeping costs down, the best of saving the most number of lives with our limited resources, is to create safe zones either in Turkey or in Iraq or in Syria. They actually go there, lock down an area, have some sort of international forces defending these people in their own country until we can expel the Islamic State and give them their country back. And then, unfortunately, we'll have to decide what we do with Assad. Yeah, we're going to have to decide what we do with Assad. We're going to have to decide we're going to have to investigate his crimes and figure out how bad Assad really was or is. All right, we're gonna have to decide. That's gonna be a hard decision. That I think we have to talk with our international partners like Russia and China. We have to make a serious discussion about what we do with Assad. But we need to expel the Islamic State and their horrible ideology and bigotry. That is, it's terrible. It's fucking, they're monstrous what they are.
Yeah, no, they're
They
horrible.
have
Like
to go.
the worst embodiment of human beings, other than maybe possibly the Westboro Baptist Church, but they're just as bad.
To be fair, the Westboro Baptist Church hasn't beheaded anyone,
Yeah, yeah.
but I know. I understand what you're saying. So that is my ideal way to solve the crisis. It's the most cost-efficient way to save the highest number of lives. Because for this, economics matters because the amount of people's lives we can literally save from death. I think that is where the amount you have to spend. I would rather save 16 times as many people on the ground in Syria than take all of those people for 16 times take 1/16 of those people into the United States and various other countries. It's important to me to save their lives so they can rebuild a better society.
God damn, another plane just flew over my
I
house
know.
again.
But
If we get super successful with this, we might have to actually get a studio.
we might. We very well might. But that's my point, is that it costs more money to bring my refugees to the United States, and I think we would be better spent, rather than vetting them and expensive vetting to get them here, is to spend that money we're spending on vetting to make them safe in their own country, so they can rebuild their society even quicker and reintegrate into their own land.
All right, so I'm not going to push back too much on that because ultimately, one, I'm not as informed on the specifics of the Syrian refugee crisis. I just, like everybody, see the horrible pictures and I just really feel for the people. But I certainly understand your point. Yeah, I mean, we don't short term. We want to get these people out of violence's way. But it's not really practical to assume that we're going to have 100,000 Syrians that are just going to call Oklahoma City their home now and root for the Thunder and go to games and all that. Like, yeah, I get that. I get that point. That's certainly a valid premise. I guess my pushback would be for you is because you're obviously you were against Hillary Clinton's no-fly zone in Syria. But if you set up a safe place in Syria or in Iraq, for these places, isn't that just making a target for ISIS to attack? I mean, I don't know if you're a national security expert, but it seems like that's still essentially creating a no-fly zone. Which, in any case, wouldn't that kind of create the same sort of the horrible situation that a no-fly zone would create if you were to set something up like that in Syria?
Let me explain why this is not. So there's a key. The point of the no-fly zone is that Russia is assisting the Assad forces with their jets, and the idea was to prevent Russian jets from assisting Assad. The idea of making a safe zone is not to create a no-fly zone. It's basically to say we have international forces defending land where basically a refugee camp, right? We try to create like a small little refugee city where we defend these people with international forces. So if Assad attacked that, which I would be political suicide for Assad to attack it. The idea is to keep the Islamic State out as best you can. Now, if the Islamic State took it over, then that'd be a political nightmare, obviously. But the idea would be to keep their forces out and defend these people. It's not something Russia would have no incentive to bomb these safe zones.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's not we're not stepping on. Yeah, it would just make Russia look totally terrible if they were just,
it'd be political suicide on the international stage. So the idea is not the no-fly zone is very different. The no-fly is say all of Syria, you don't fly your jets there, or we'll shoot them down.
Which is then setting up World War III, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I was very
against I'm against no-fly zones as well too. For the record, I would still vote for Hillary because Trump is a lunatic, but nonetheless, I was very much agreed with you on her position on no-fly zone. That's a disastrous.
And remember what happened in Libya when we established a no-fly zone? We overthrew the Russian ally Libyan dictator. So I don't think Russia was going to go, oh, remember that thing you did that screwed over our ally? Let's do that. You can do that again. Like, I don't think they were going to jump up and down to have us overthrow.
So I think I've covered my bases on it. Do you have anything else to add on the Syrian refugee crisis? Obviously, it's a horrible thing. Both of us, feel for the people in this region. It's really just a horrible situation. But there are various ways to help these people, and hopefully, if anything, we should all be informed and understand that this is going on.
I think the most important thing is just informed on what's going on. Don't be suicidally empathetic to these people, but help these people when you can. Contribute to organizations like Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders and Médecins Sans Frontières, I think is what their official. They contribute to the organizations that are trying to help these people. That's how you can help them. You can, keep people informed on the issues. Don't let this just be another piece of noise in the news cycle. Talk about what's going on in Syria. Keep informed. I just heard a report that Palmyra may have been taken by the Islamic State, which would be a huge blow to the effort to expel them, and terrible. So just keep informed. These are people too. They're people too. I'm not saying that none of them should come to the United States. I'm just saying that we should do whatever we can to save as many lives as possible. And unfortunately, that means allocating our resources to keep them safe in their own country. And we need to negotiate with the Gulf states to try and help these people as well, because I think to help them where they live is the best thing we can do for them.
And I can't really push back on that. That seems like a reasonable approach to a very complicated problem. As long as people in this country do not demean and besmirch, fellow American citizens who happen to be Muslim. I think that's really the big key thing that we can do as well to make sure that we actually defeat ISIS and actually win this unwinnable war, is essentially to show that we are not the terrorists ourselves. Propaganda is a huge thing. While it may not, be responsible or safe to bring in a lot of immigrants, it's also not responsible and safe to be mean to our fellow Americans who are Muslim, or to assume that all Muslims are terrorists, or to hold any sort of stereotypical things like that. So along with talking with people, we need to make sure that that while we're talking with people, that we hold people accountable, and that if you do see somebody being bullied, I'd tell this story. I was campaigning on my last campaign, and the campaign we were working for, we had a young Muslim woman that was knocking on doors, and these were white Democrats. These are white, Democrat voting people, and they wouldn't talk to her. They wouldn't hear what she had to say, even though she's representing their candidate, their white candidate. They didn't have anything to say. So, it's if we're really ever going to beat ISIS, we have to prove that we're not ISIS. We're not as bad as ISIS, and we've certainly not done a great job of displaying that on the world stage. Now, granted, we don't cut people's heads off, but we do also drone hospitals. So, let's look in the mirror a little bit before we attack everybody else.
Yeah, and I just want to say that look what we've done with Christian Americans and Catholics especially. We've practically changed their mind about gay marriage, something that was codified in an ancient text that they believed to be sacred. We've essentially changed most of I would say about half the country's mind on gay marriage, and we've changed that. And we've made people accept these people as parts of their family, as parts of our society. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, even in 10 years with the Islamic community, but I think if we keep talking with them, don't let them isolate themselves, let them be part of our communities, have discussions with them, be friends with them. We can change their minds too, because I know my friends, they've changed their minds on gay marriage and on Israel and other things over a long lifetime. Unfortunately, fortunately, they also left the faith. That's why I will never call them out by name or give identifying features. But they can change, and I think it's our job to work with all of our fellow citizens of the United States to make society better for everyone.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted just to emphasize that point. I've been saying this to the much annoyance of some of my friends, but to be liberal is actually be liberal. And while you wouldn't claim to be liberal, I'm someone who does. And for people that do, for people who claim to, vote for progressive candidates, there's a certain amount of, you can't, then turn around and say, oh, I voted for Bernie Sanders, I support progressive candidates, and then turn around and say, screw those people, screw people who voted for Trump, like they're all horrible. Like it just doesn't. It makes you look like a hypocrite. Now that it's not really related to what I want to say, but I just wanted to, put that out there just as a public service announcement. If you're going to be a liberal, if you're going to pretend to be, or say you're a liberal, then, start acting like, a good Samaritan and actually be a decent person.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said, definitely. I think if you're a liberal, you have to, I'm not saying you have to be, you have to be rude to people of Muslim people. I'm not saying you have to tell them their religion is wrong. I'm just telling you that you gotta, just like you talked with Christians in the past 20 years, you gotta remind them that these backwards views, you gotta change them. It's not a way to live to hold this irrational hatred for gay people. It's not a way to live to hold this irrational hatred for non-believers. It's not
For
a way to
women.
live. Yeah, it's not a way to live to think women should be second or third class citizens. You know, it's not a way to live to cover your women. Trust me, it's much nicer when when you can see a woman's shoulders. Okay. Yeah,
I certainly agree.
it's not a way
But
to.
okay, so do you have anything else to talk on immigration, or should we sign out because Sunday Night Football is starting? So priorities.
Yeah, no, I think I've said my piece, and I hope that we can come up with a conclusive, well, a good solution for our immigration crisis on all fronts. I hope that we can make Mexico a country worth living in, a fantastic place to visit with a vibrant, thriving economy that people will be flocking to, so that we can make this world a better place for everyone and make our southern border even more secure.
And I would say that while I agree you are not a bigot for believing that people who are here illegally should be sent home, I think that there are better approaches, and I think that we need to be more comprehensive. And I think principles can go to hell. But on the end of on the end of sort of the Syrian refugee crisis, I would just emphasize again, let's all have a heart and make sure you're informed on things. Make sure to check out independent media. Don't focus on CNN or MSNBC or Fox to tell you what's going on in the world, because you will learn absolutely nothing. So with that, I just want to say thank you for listening. Make sure to check us out on our different social media, and please give us feedback. Hopefully tonight we'll get our first hate mail. Fingers crossed. Thank you, everyone. And again, remember, always debate, and always be civil. And have a good night.
All right. And this is Ghost Politics signing off.